Today we're going to be learning Yevamot Daf Daled. This week's learning is sponsored by Sharon Hirsch in honor of her daughter, daughters-in-law, and granddaughters. And today's learning is sponsored by Ricky and Alan Zibit in loving memory of Ricky's mother, Frida Carlin, Fredel Bat Meir Verifka, on the occasion of her 7th yahrzeit. May her neshama have an aliyah. Okay, we're getting back to, I would say, the regular, typical Gemara type things, although this daf part of it, I will warn you, is a little bit X-rated in terms of the content. So certainly in the latter part of the daf, so beware, especially if you're maybe a younger listener. Okay, that was my warning. So we're going to get started. A little bit of review of this Isur Mosif, Isur Kolel, because even though it was in yesterday's daf and the day before, and we already have a new Mishnah, this Mishnah is clearly related to the same idea. Okay, maybe before we even review that, I'll review the Mishnah, the case in the Mishnah that we saw. Two people betrothed two women, and they were both two brothers, and they betrothed two sisters, and they accidentally, after the Kiddushin, they mixed up the women, went home and slept with the wrong women. And according to our Mishnah, they're chayav on 4 things, and according to Rabbi Chia, there's 16 sin offerings altogether, because each of the 4 people have to bring 4 offerings. Eshet ish, right? She was a married woman and slept with a man, and he was slept with a married woman. And Eshet ach, each one slept with their brother's wife. And achot isha, each one slept with their wife's sister. And theoretically, if she was in nidah, then you would end up with these 4. Okay, if she was menstruating at the time, there was an additional forbidden to sleep with a woman who's menstruating. So now, how does this relate to Mosif, Kolel, and Batachat? So we talked about that there's these 3 kind of, in general, ein isur halal isur. If once you're prohibited for one reason, you don't add an additional prohibition unless there's some extra something that's happening, and then there's different opinions about which one works and which one doesn't. So isur batachat is when they both happened at the same time. We said logic would state that if both isurim kick in at the same time, both prohibitions, then it's not like one is stronger than the other. Usually it's one, and then after that, another. So if one is not stronger than the other, one doesn't come before the other, then both are going to actually apply, because who's to choose which one? Isur Mosif, and today we're going to expand the definition of Isur Mosif, which is funny because Mosif is an expanded definition, but we're going to expand it, meaning yesterday or the day before we explained what is Mosif. Mosif means it's forbidden to me. Now it's going to be forbidden to other people as well. So that's an additional, right? It's an addition. It's expanded because it's not only to me, right? Let's say he married, she was achot ishto, right? He married his wife, and then her sister was forbidden. Then as soon as her brother marries the other sister, that's the wrong one. I just said it wrong. It's the opposite. It's eshet ach, which is once the brother, I said it right. Once the brother marries the sister, not only are her sisters forbidden, but now in addition, all his brothers are forbidden to that woman's sisters. In other words, as we said it the other day, the prohibition on him becomes expanded not only to him, but to other people as well. Okay, today we're going to learn that, it's so tricky because there's machlokot about this, and it's not so clear that everyone agrees. But today we're going to learn that Isur Mosif, according to some of the commentaries, and I'm going to go with that. I'm not going to confuse you by giving you multiple different interpretations. But Isur Mosif can also be not just more people are forbidden, like now all his brothers are forbidden to that woman, right, to his wife's sister, but all his brothers are now forbidden to any of them because, right, to Rachel, to the wife, all the brothers become forbidden to her. That's Isur Mosif. Isur Mosif can also be not just, I think I said before to all the sisters, I meant specifically to that sister. Now all the brothers are forbidden. In addition, it could be a case where something's forbidden, let's say to eat, and now we're going to add on, it's not only forbidden to eat, you also can't get any benefit from it. Okay, that's going to be our case today. We're going to see 2 that are similar to that, so you'll see the review of it in a few minutes. Then we get to Isur Kolel. Isur Kolel was the case where it has to do with whatever's prohibited. We're now adding more things, not just her, but her sisters. Okay, so that's not right. And again, we said this is focusing from his perspective and that she's what's prohibited. And now not just her, but more things. Okay, so we'll see it with cheled, for instance, the forbidden fat. Not just that, but we'll get to a case where more than just that, let's say the whole animal is forbidden, not just the chelef part, or like that's in Isur Kolel. Okay, where focus is specifically on what's prohibited is going to be more things are prohibited rather than what I just described before about more, it's prohibited in a different way. Some people actually call that Isur Mosif because it's Isur Chamol, because now it ups it a level, right? It's not just forbidden for eating, it's also forbidden to benefit from. That makes it more stringent. That's going to be Mosif as well. It's tricky because when we said it last time, we said Isur Mosif is really on the person itself, not on the object. Here it is on the object, but it's more that what's becoming forbidden to the person is something more severe. Okay, so that's why it's tricky, and that's why some people disagree with this. But anyway, I'm going to stick with that interpretation. So now, going back to our Mishnah, we have these 4 cases. Now, the way the Gemara understands them is that the 4 cases include the chotisha, eshet ach, nida, right? And eshet ish, that she's a married woman, are basically, all of them include these 3 things. Isur batachat, Isur mosif, and Isur kolel. So how so? If we take the brother who gets married second, let's say, okay, when we take him, because it's both brothers. So if we take the one who gets married second, so when his brother married the first woman, she became forbidden to him to the second brother, right? The Rachel, the one who married Reuven, becomes forbidden to him. Number 1, achot isha, she's now a married woman. Number 2, I'm sorry, and not achot isha, eshet ish, I'm confusing the terms. Eshet ish, she's a married woman, and they all kind of sound the same. And she's eshet ach, she's the brother of his wife. So Rachel becomes forbidden to Shimon, bivat echat, 2 things, right? This actually was from the beginning. We just never discussed this eshet ish, right? She's a married woman, okay? It only comes up here now, but it could have come up earlier because it was the same thing. If she's his brother's wife, she's obviously a married woman. So those 2 happen bivat echat. So there we got bat echat. Then, if she was a nida, okay, that becomes an Isur Mosif, because now she's not only forbidden to him, she's also forbidden to her husband even, because she's a nida. So that adds on more people to whom she's prohibited. Now, eshet ach in the reverse case would be the second thing that would be an Isur Kolel, Isur Mosif, if we were talking about Reuven, but we're not right now. And then Isur Kolel will be achot ishto, because now, also right now, when he marries his wife later, that's going to be Isur Kolel, because now not only is Rachel forbidden because she's married to his brother, she's also forbidden because he's married to her sister. And also now, right, he's forbidden to more than just her, all the sisters as well. So that's what we call Isur Kolel. So according to our Mishnah, you have to, if you're going to view all those cases, right, if it was Reuven, it would be a little bit different, but because of the order. It doesn't really matter right now. At least in that case, you get all 3. So that's what the Gemara's question is. And to that question, we're going to have 2 answers, but the second answer we're only going to get to after we have a little bit of a digression. Uman Hai Tana, I'm at the top of Lamed. Who's the Tana? De'ile Isur Kolel B'Isur Mosif B'Isur Batachad. Meaning, who's the author of our Mishnah who holds that all 3 things, right? What we learned yesterday is Rabbi Shimon only holds probably Batachad, right? And Rabbi Yossi, we weren't sure if he holds only Isur Mosif, also Isur Mosif and Batachad, possibly all 3, but it wasn't very clear. We had all different opinions about Rabbi Yossi. So we don't know. So likely, we're not going to say Rabbi Yossi. We want to find someone who's clear-cut that they hold this way. So it's Rabbi Meir's opinion. How do we know this? Ditanya, as it says it actually should be Ditnan. It says in the Mishnah in Kritut, Yesh ochel achila achat v'chayav aleha arba chataot v'asham achat. Okay, here we're going to have a case, and Rabbi Meir doesn't come in yet. We'll see Rabbi Meir in a minute, or maybe 3 minutes. But it says someone could eat a food item and could have to bring 4 sin offerings and a guilt offering, okay, because I'll have a whole bunch of these sulim upon. So now we're going to get to, and as I said, there's going to be a few define this a little differently, which one falls into which category. But we're going to see all of them here, other than Batachat, and only when we get to Rabbi Meir are we going to see Batachat as well. So Tamesh Achal Chelev. We have an impure person who eats chelev. Chelev is the part of the animal that you're not allowed to eat. It's a certain fat. There's fats, which are shuman, and then there's fats that are called chelev. They're the parts that, if it's a sacrifice, they get burnt on the altar and you can't eat them. But you also can't eat them in a regular animal because they're the parts that get burnt on the altar in a sacrifice. So, and that's why it's only for behemot and not chayot, because chayot can't be brought on the altar. So it's not relevant for them, like deer and things like that. but they are relevant for animals that go on the altar. So chaylev is the first thing, because as soon as the animal's born, it's isur chaylev. You can't eat the forbidden fats. So that comes first. Then the person's tameh. Now, a tameh person can't eat chaylev if we're going to see it was sanctified. It was from an animal that was going on the altar. Vihu, we'll see this in a minute. Vihu notar min hamukdashim. Not only was it sacrificial chaylev that you were supposed to burn on the altar, but you didn't burn it within the designated time. Then you add another forbidden thing, which is notar. Okay, so let's explain for a minute what all these things fall into. So it's chaylev. That was the first. I put in the chart all these things also. Kodshim, sanctified items that you eat betuma, are forbidden, right? So now that's isur kolel. Why is it isur kolel? Because not only is the chaylev forbidden, but all the parts of the animal are forbidden, because you can't eat sanctified items when you're impure. So that's kolel, because the prohibited item the more things about it became prohibited. Then you also have din mi'ilah, which is why you bring the korban hasham, because anything that's sanctified, you can't benefit from sanctified items. That's isur mosif. Why? And this is what I said before, and this is a bit of a machloket between people. But if you go by the definition I used before, what happened here was you added to the isur chaylev. Not only can you not eat it, but when din mi'ilah kicks in, meaning once it becomes sanctified, right, which it wasn't when it was born, you only sanctify it later to use as your sacrifice. When you sanctified it, you now can't benefit from it at all. You can't get any hana'ah, not only eating, but let's say you want to burn it and use it for candlelight or something. You can't do that. And the last thing, which we didn't read yet, Yom Kippurim, happens to be Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to eat anything. So that's again, isur kolel. First it was chaylev, then you couldn't eat the whole animal because you became impure, and the whole thing was sanctified. Now you can't eat any food at all because it's Yom Kippur. So now that's again kolel, because now there's more items that are prohibited to you. So we had isur mosif, which was the mi'ilah, which you added on a new level, that it's not just asur be'achila, it's asur also b'hana'ah, to benefit. And then we had the isurei kolel, and notar was also mosif, because then it became also forbidden to offer on the altar. I forgot to mention that one. So notar now means the parts that you, right, the chaylev was supposed to be burnt on the altar. But now you're not allowed to do that either. So it's not only forbidden to eat, it's not only forbidden to benefit from, it's also it's forbidden to go on the altar. So that also makes it another level that's mosif. So that's how you can get to 4 chataot and 1 asham. Comes Rabbi Meir and he adds, Rabbi Meir Omer, imayta Shabbat, v'hotzio b'piv chayav. If it was Shabbat and you carried it out in your mouth, you were eating it, and as you were eating it, you walked from one domain to the other. You basically carried it in your mouth. So he thinks you're obligated another one. Now here comes in batachat, because Shabbat and Yom Kippur kick in at the exact same time, and now you're chayav for carrying it for Shabbat. Some people say, what about carrying on Yom Kippur? So first of all, there happens to be machloket. If you might remember, we saw this about whether you could carry on Yom Kippur or not. So maybe this one holds there isn't. Anyway, some questions are asked about that. We'll leave that issue aside. Amrulo, they said to him, Eino min Hashem. No, we don't count hotza'ah here, because we're talking about things that affect isur achila, eating. And that's not, yes, it's true, you're carrying it while you're eating, but that's not really called eating. And like you don't normally carry while you're eating. The rabbis think for various reasons that this is not part of the count, and therefore they disagree with it. Anyway, the point being that Rabbi Meir here holds isur kolel, isur mosif, and isur batachat, and he makes you obligated for each one. So he must be the one in our Mishnah who holds batachat, right? The eshet ish and the achotish, the eshet ach, his brother's wife, were all batachat. We had the kolel, which was also achotish to, which included all of her sisters, and isur mosif, which was the nida issue. So now they say, okay, we have one question before we get to, okay, this was all to explain. This is Rabbi Meir. Our Mishnah goes like Rabbi Meir, as I promised you before. We're going to see a different answer, okay? But the first answer is it's Rabbi Meir. And now we say, wait, there's another issue. Now, some people think that this issue relates to specifically the chaylev case, and some people think it relates to the Mishnah case. We're going to assume it relates to the Mishnah case. And they now ask a question. There's another issue here, though. The people who were getting married here were trying to do a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to get married, okay? It depends how you define, right? How much of a mitzvah is it to get married? But they're assuming it's a mitzvah to get married. This is a classic case of ta'ah bidvar mitzvah, meaning if you make a mistake while you're doing a mitzvah, there's a machloket, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, about whether you have to bring a sin offering or not. So some people say yes, some people say no. So now the question is, according to, does Rabbi Meir go? In other words, Rabbi Meir must be going according to the one who said, if you make a mistake while doing a mitzvah, you still have to bring a sin offering because he obviously obligates you in a sin offering. And that's going to be the Gemara's question, or kind of their first way of understanding it. For Rabbi Meir, Aliba Deman, maybe I should already tell you where the machloket is. And we actually saw this before in Masechet Shabbat. It's machloket about if you have two babies, it sounds similar to this case, where you get confused which one. One is supposed to do a Brit Milah on Shabbat. Now, Brit Milah overrides Shabbat, but only if it's the 8th day on Shabbat. So there were two babies. One was supposed to be on Shabbat. One was supposed to be on Sunday. And you mixed up by accident and you did the Brit Milah on Shabbat of the baby who was supposed to have the Brit Milah on Sunday. So you did the wrong one. So now that's the machloket, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, about whether you have to bring a sin offering or not. So one says, look, you were trying to do a mitzvah. You messed up, but you were trying to do something good. And therefore, we're not going to make you liable. So this could be twins. It could be not twins. It could be twins that were both born ben hashmasha. Right? That's the most likely way you're going to get confused. They were born, if you're born right when Shabbat's coming in, right, or the twilight time, then a week later, when you're Brit Milah, we're not sure if the baby was a Friday baby or a Shabbat baby. And then you don't do a Friday because maybe it's too early. And you don't do a Shabbat because maybe it wasn't born on Shabbat. Maybe it was Friday. So you actually push it off to Sunday. It could be that case. It could be just a case where there were two babies that were born a day apart and one was supposed to be done. They got mixed up. So now Rabbi Meir Aliba Deman, according to Aliba de Rabbi Yoshua, can't be because Hamal didn't Rabbi Yoshua say to Abid Var Mitzvah Patur in the Brit Milah case. Ella Aliba de Rabbi Eliezer. It must be also Rabbi Eliezer because here's a guy made a mistake in terms of getting married and therefore we should exempt him. So that must be not Rabbi Yoshua, only Rabbi Eliezer who says you're liable. Alternatively, though they reject this and they say, well, really, you could explain it the other way because you could distinguish between the cases. How so? Lo olam aliba de Rabbi Yoshua. Ki ka'amar Rabbi Yoshua ta'abed var mitzvah patur hanemi legabe tinokot dizmano bahul. What's the issue with the tinokot? You have a time frame, a specific time frame. This is a fascinating idea, which is if you make a mistake because you're doing a mitzvah, and you're trying to get the mitzvah done in the proper time, and you're rushing because of that, right? We all know that when we rush, right, we make mistakes. So therefore, if you made a mistake while trying to do a mitzvah because you were rushing to get it in the proper time, you wanted to do it on day number 8, which was Shabbat. So you rushed and then you accidentally did the wrong baby. So we're going to exempt you. But aval hai, but in this case, kevan de'ein zmano bahul lo. But you had no excuse here. There was no rush to sleep with your new wife. Now, it's interesting because, first of all, the Gemara in Masechet Brachot, if you remember, has a whole thing about how the husband on the first night is all talud and he's worried and concerned and about having relations with his wife on the first night and she's a virgin and all that. And therefore, he's patur from Kriyat Shema. And you could say he's bahul, but for some reason, they don't think that that's a consideration because there's no bihila, concern over a time frame issue. It's not like he has to have relations with her that night, even though, it is recommended or it's a mitzvah. You don't have to, for sure not. But therefore, it's not the same thing. Okay, so therefore they say, maybe Rabbi Yeshua, who exempts there, wouldn't necessarily exempt here because you don't have that time issue, which is what's causing you the mistake. Only when it's a mistake doing a mitzvah, when there's a time frame to it, are we going to make you exempt? So now they say, wait a minute, B'harei truma, we're going to disprove that theory that has to do with concern about a time. What about truma? Eating truma is a mitzvah. If you're eating truma, and then what happens? You're a Kohen. And then while you're eating truma, noda, shu ben grusha ben chalitza, you all of a sudden find out that your mother had been divorced before or had gotten chalitza before. You never knew that, which means basically you're a halal. You're not a kohen. Basically, you have a problematic kahuna, which means you're not allowed to eat truma. So all of a sudden you find this out while you're eating truma. What do we say? Again, Rabbi Eliezer mechayev keren v'chomesh. Rabbi Yeshua poter. Rabbi Yeshua exempts you. Now there's no time frame here that you could say I was busy trying to eat my truma and I messed up because of that. Right? It's not relevant here. First of all, some of the commentaries say, how could we even make you liable? You had no idea. How are you supposed to know? So they claim that there must have been rumors about it and you just ignored the rumors. Because if really, right, there's a difference between shogeg and ones, right? We're going to see this many times further on in Shas. We've probably seen it before already. Comes up most in Ir Mikla, when someone kills someone accidentally, comes up in damages and stuff. But anyway, There's a difference between ones, if you had no way of knowing, and then we're not going to make you liable, and shgaga, which is you maybe had a way to kind of figure it out, but you didn't. It was still unwitting, but it was in between. So therefore, they claim that that must be the case, that there were rumors and you just ignored them. And then, you found out it was really true while you were eating your truma. So that's not a time-sensitive issue that, you were rushing to finish it because of that. So the Gemara comes up, nice that we're getting close to Erev Pesach and they connect. Wait till we get to Pesach and we have all this Pesach sugyot. But right now they say, Ha'it marala, wasn't it said about that? Amar Abevi v'Arabaye, it was Erev Pesach in the morning and you had to get rid of your chametz, and your chametz was truma, and you were trying to get rid of it quickly before the hour that you're not allowed to eat chametz kicked in. And that's why it was a mitzvah that was time sensitive. And that's why you're exempt according to Rabbi Yeshua. But if it wasn't that case, you wouldn't be exempt. Okay, so that was an aside that we were just trying. Okay, again, what did we do until now? We said the author of our mission must be Rabbi Meir. In a minute, we're going to suggest now a different option. And then we prove that Rabbi Meir from the Chaylev case, he's the one who holds Batachat, Kolel, and Mosif, you're all liable for, which explains our Mishnah. And then we just tried to say, does he side on one side or the other of this Ta'abid Var Mitzvah? In which case we said, actually, he could fit with everybody because even Rabbi Yeshua, who exempts in the other cases, would agree here that there's no exemption because it's not a time-sensitive issue that caused him to make the mistake, right? And you need basically time-sensitive and mitzvah that you're trying to do to allow you to be exempt. Now we get to the second explanation. You could say, and now we get to a bit of an absurd situation. Okay, hold off. But you could explain the Mishnah as being Rabbi Shimon. If you remember, Rabbi Shimon holds that if they both happen at the same time, then even though he has the most limited option, right? He generally thinks ein isur halal isur, prohibition cannot go upon another prohibition. Once you're forbidden for one reason, we don't add unless they all happened at the same time, because it wasn't one and then the other, and we don't know how to choose. So you're all liable for them both. So now in our case, you're going to be liable for all four. Why? Because they all happened at the same time. Now this has to mean that the woman became forbidden to the man and the man became forbidden to the woman for all those reasons, all simultaneously. So how would this possibly happen? And remember, she has to be a nida as well. So, and that the nida happened to have started at that exact moment, right? It's a little bit hard to believe. So now the Gemara is going to also question it. I could get the Eshedish, Eshetach, Achot Isha. That could all happen at the same time. How so? We're talking about two brothers and two sisters. So why don't you just say Shavinu Shaliach? Two brothers sent one messenger. V'shavu inhu shaliach. The two sisters sent another shaliach. Upaga shaliach b'shaliach. They meet each other, right? Because that was the whole point. And they said, okay, here's money, right? I'm giving this money so that this brother and this brother can, right? These two brothers, I'm giving you the money to betroth for these two sisters, and it all happens at the exact same moment. That's possible. So we can get Eshedish, Achot Isha, and Eshetach all at the same time. Very easy. But Elanidut, what they're going to all start, both of them are going to have their period kick in right at that exact moment. That's a little odd. So Amarav, if you thought that was hard to believe, he's going to come up with a really crazy situation. And in fact, I'll already tell you, I'm not going to go into it, but Rabbeinu Chanal and Tosfot understand this totally differently because they say this is really absurd and hard to believe. And there's also some halachic issue with it. Doesn't make sense. But I'm going to go with this interpretation anyway. This is Rashi and others. Amrav Amarav Bishofot mitoch Yugimel Achar 13 lichiyuvi inhu mitoch 12 Achar 12 lichiyuvi in. What does this mean? What it means is we don't care when the kiddushin took place. Okay, the kiddushin could have taken place at some point earlier, which is a little bit of the problem because we're going to say that what happened was the women, okay, shofot, the women are bleeding, okay, continuously. It doesn't have to be so much continuously, but they have to be bleeding when they turn. Okay, now at the exact moment, what's going to happen? They're bleeding. Let's say they start bleeding. It doesn't matter when they start bleeding, and it doesn't matter when the kiddushin happened. The issue is when do all the isurim kick in? Now, this goes back to something we said two dapim ago, right? That the isur can kick in when you turn gil mitzvot. So what we're going to have is the two brothers are twins, the two sisters are twins. They each marry each other. Okay, again, it doesn't matter. They don't even have to get married at the same time, betrothed, right? Now, what happens though? When does Isur, Esherish, Achotisha, all that kick in? When they become of age, between, right, the end of the 13th year, beginning of the 14th, which is basically the day we say you turn 13, and the girl, the day she turned 12. Now, number one, you're missing here. What about Shtei Sarot? You need pubic hairs. So, okay, but maybe you need both. So maybe they had already and then kicked in Gil, 12 and 13 for them. You have to have that each are exactly a year apart, right? But the boys and the girls were exactly a year apart because it all has to happen on the same day. And that they have their period before, basically. And as they're going into their Gil mitzvot, the girls, they're bleeding. So at that moment that they turn 12 and the boys turn 13, so yes, 2 sets of twins. So at that point, that's when everything kicks in, and that's when it all happens. Okay, now the main halachic issue with this is, yes, the girl can get betrothed under age 12 because her father can betroth her. We've learned that before, but a man needs to be over the age of 13. So Tosafot says, what are you talking about? You can't betroth a woman until you're of age. So they understand that the Yud Gimel is something different. It's the Gimel, it has to do with the girl, and it's a 3 year, a whole different interpretation, which is also a little bit crazy. Anyway, obviously it's a little hard to come up with a scenario like this, but they do say there is some potential scenario where this could happen, and then you can explain our Mishnah according to Rabbi Shimon. Okay, we're going to leave that aside and move on, even though it's quite a little difficult to swallow. Okay, here come, if you thought that was difficult, now comes the both a little bit graphic part of today's daf, and very interesting in terms of, we're going to see 2 different halachot, or 2 different perspectives of rabbis that affect halacha about when and how can we assume they can't get pregnant, okay? Interesting assumptions, not known to be valid today and from medical perspective. But the rabbis, doesn't surprise us, right? The rabbis, without proper medical scientific research, right? They came up with theories as to certain things. So mafrishinota, the Mishnah had said, after these women got flipped, we switch them, right? We basically say, you go back to now marrying your original husband, but because it was all a mistake, right? Anyway, then we said, but you have to wait 3 months because, right? If you're Gdola, because maybe you got pregnant. So comes the Gemara and asks, but don't we know, now we're assuming the women were virgins. Now, if a woman's a virgin, we know, the rabbis say, that you can't get pregnant on the same night that you tear your hymen, lose your virginity. Okay, not necessarily true medically. The Koran has a good footnote. I always like the Koran on these issues because they address from a more modern medical perspective, and they say, well, it could be there's emotional things going on, and because of that, maybe the relation doesn't, the act doesn't end up being a real proper act of sexual relations, which then the woman can't get pregnant. So there's maybe ways that this could happen in our world, right? From our understanding, and maybe also the chances are less. But in any case, that's the assumption the rabbis make. So if so, right, how could you say you have to separate them? This was the woman's first act of sexual relations, and therefore it was unlikely that, right, they can't get pregnant. If they can't get pregnant, according to what the rabbis believe, then why do they have to wait 3 months? The whole issue of 3 months, remember, is the rabbis believe babies are either born after 7 months of becoming pregnant or 9 months. So they didn't believe there were 8-month babies. They said that's not ben kayama. There's no such thing. So if they marry right away and then they had a baby, we wouldn't know, is it, right, or let's say they married a month later or whatever it is, right? Is it a 7-month baby of the other one, of the new husband, or a 9-month baby of the other one? Okay, it doesn't really matter, the 8th month, 9 month for this issue. I'm just kind of telling you that that's something we know. But the point is, it would be confusing who she belonged to, who the baby belonged to. So because of that, we make them wait 3 months. So we'll see, they make them wait in all sorts of a get. After getting a get, you can't get married for another 3 months, etc. So Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rav Ravua, it must be Shaba'alu v'shanu. They must have slept with them twice. So now the Gemara asks, well, if that's the case, it should be 32 chataot because they each did it, right? That's 4 for each, and there's 4 people, and then they each did it twice. They should be liable 32. So why do you say in our Mishnah we're talking about 16 sin offerings? So they say that's not a question. According to you, Rabbi Eliezer requires a chatat offering for every thrust that the man goes in. You're required extra sin offering. So according to him, there'll be way more than 32, and Rabbi Chia only mentioned 16. So what did Rabbi Chia mean? He was talking about the first thrust inside. Everyone's liable 16, okay? Him, her, right? All four of them. But they weren't hachanami to be a rishona kachashik. They're talking about the first one, not the second one. Okay, you can just explain it that way, even though there was more, Rabbi Chia just wasn't relating to. So Amalei Rabba Rav Nachman. Now we're going to have a question. Wait a minute. Okay, now we get to a Tanakh Shiur about Tamar and Yehuda. So I brought the psukim. You can read them inside. Breshit, I brought it on the sheet, or you can look up in anywhere you want, the English if you want to follow. Breshit chapter 38, starting from Pasuk Vav. Not the story of Tamar. She marries the first son of Yehuda, then he dies, and then she marries Onan. And Onan says, listen, right, and he's supposed to do Yibum, Yevamot, it even says in the Torah. Interesting, they're bringing up Tamar in our context because we've been talking about Yibum all along. It's the first case of Yibum in the Torah. And says, right, Yehuda says to Onan, go sleep with your brother's wife, v'yabemota, to Yibum. So you see there was even Yibum before the Torah was given. And then Onan says, I know that it says Vayeda Onan, he knew Kilo lo yehazera, the child is not going to be named for him, but for his brother. And therefore, when he slept with her, Vishichet Arza, he basically let the semen go out of her body, wouldn't let it go inside because he didn't want her to have children. Lebilti Natan Zera Lachiv. And because of that, Vayera ben Hashem gets angry, Asher Asa, or not get angry, but it was bad in the eyes of God, and Vayamet Gamoto. And God caused him to die as well. We're going to get back to these words, gam oto, okay? Also him, we're going to then say that must have done the same thing because it seems like they must have died for the same reason, even though it doesn't say that explicitly. And then Yehuda doesn't want to marry Tamar, to marry her off to the next son because he's worried his next son's going to die. And therefore, he basically doesn't do it. And then she dresses up as a prostitute and then he ends up sleeping with her and then she gets pregnant. So comes the Gemara and says, she had a child with her first encounter, right? When the day she lost her virginity with Yehuda. So Amarle. So first we're going to answer the question. Then we're going to say, how do we know she was still a virgin? Okay. Even right. She had two husbands. So we'll get back to that. First the answer, Amarle Tamar be'etzba ma'acha. She tore her hymen with her finger. Okay. And now we're going to see to Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, I told you this Gemara is going to be a little bit graphic. Kol mo'achot shel beit Rebbe Tamar Shman. All the women in the house of Rebbe would do this, or the women that were in the house of Rebbe that did this, Tamar Shman, they would call themselves Tamar because they did what she did. Okay, and there we see that she did this. It's not just an answer we're giving, but it came up somewhere else. Why would they do that? Because they wanted to get pregnant right away. It was, and some people say they didn't want to kind of waste an act of sexual relations without being able to get pregnant. So this was right. You think of it as, I wouldn't want to walk around telling everybody I did this, but for them, it was a very respectable thing that they did this, right? This was trying to say, we want to get pregnant right away from the first time. So now that's how we explain that she got pregnant, right? Even though we know that women generally don't. Well, she already tore her hymen before, and that's why she was able to get pregnant, right? And she tore it on her own. But wait, she was married before. So what do you mean she was still a virgin? So they say, okay, what does that mean? They had sex, anal sex with her. That was how they did it. They didn't have sex in a normal manner. Soon we're going to figure out why. So Meitive, first they say we have a contradiction. Okay, before we get to why did they do this, we have a contradiction from the following source. Now we get to something else entirely. A woman, when she's nursing, we learned this not so long ago, there was a concern that if she got pregnant, it would affect her milk. She wouldn't be able to nurse properly, which this is known to actually be somewhat true. They were worried they didn't have any sort of formulas in those days. So in order not to help her dry her milk up, she would try not to get pregnant. So for 24 months, which is usually the time period of a woman who's considered a nursing mother, Rabbi Eliezer says, having sexual relations, he can go inside and then come outside and have the semen come out of the woman's body. Amrulo, the rabbi said to him, what are you doing? That's hashchatat shechvat zera, right? You're not allowed to let semen spill unnecessarily. And that's like Aaron Onan did. So that means it wasn't biyashalo kedarka. It means that what Aaron Onan did was exactly this that we just described. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a contradiction. It's similar to what they did. It's not exactly what they did. It was hashchatat shechvat zera, right? Which is basically letting the seed spill. But in the case with the nursing women, they had sex in a normal manner. They just then came out and had it spill outside. But with Aaron Onan, they did what we call biyashalo kedarka. So that's different. That resolves that question. But now they say, but what was their motivation? So Onan, it's very clear. Bishlama Onan, it says in the verse, Tichtiv v'shechet arza. Ella, right? He did it specifically, and we know he did it. Right? We know it's clear from the pasuk he did it. So Ella minalan. How do we know that did that? That's I actually jumped the gun. Why he did it, we'll get to later. But how do we know that he did it and that she was still a virgin? So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Tichtiv vayamet gamoto. God put him to death also, right? Meaning Onan died also. We're going to assume also like died, not just that they also died, but because Afu B'otam mitam met. It must be he died for the same reason that died. So even though the pasuk didn't tell us why died, we assume from here that they connect the two in the death. It must be he also died for the same reason. So Bishlama Onan, now the question is, what was their motivation? Onan is very clear. Mishum lo yehazar. He didn't want to have a child that was named for his brother. He wanted the child to be his own. So that's why I said, I'm not going to marry Tamar. Ella, or I'm not going to have relations with her properly, right? He married her. He just didn't want to have relations with her. Ella, my time avid hachi. He was worried that if she got pregnant, she would not be as beautiful as she was before, right? She would be, we all know pregnant women, they could look beautiful, but, there was this idea, she might not look beautiful. Maybe he was worried for the long term, what it would do to her. Anyway, he wanted to preserve her exactly as she was, and that's why he didn't want her to get pregnant. Okay, so that was a whole aside that we got to, because, again, we questioned our Mishnah by saying, why did they have to wait 3 months? If this was the first time they had relations, they're not going to be pregnant. And the whole reason to wait 3 months before they go back to their original husband is because we're worried they got pregnant, and then we won't know from which brother did she get pregnant. And therefore, right, and which is a whole issue for all sorts of reasons, right, in terms of who the kids are forbidden to marry, mamzerim issues, etc. And, also you'd like to know who the father is. In any case, that's number one, right? What about Tamal? Right. Oh, so then we said, it must be they had bi'ah more than once, and that's why we're worried. So which would mean that if they only had one encounter, one sexual relation, then it wouldn't be an issue to wait 3 months. Now, I don't know how you're going to prove that or whatever else, but that's interesting. Then we said, what about Tamar? How did she get pregnant based on this concept that the rabbis assumed? And then we said, right, so the reason is she tore her hymen on her own, and that's why she was able to get pregnant the first time. Now we're going to talk about another halacha that comes out of this concept that one can't get pregnant. It's actually going to be based on a verse we just read yesterday in the Parsha. Tanu Rabbanan, Ota Prat Lekala. So the verse is from Vayikra. I put it on the sheet also, chapter 15, Tevav, Pasuk Yud 18. Isha shirishkav ish ota shechvat zera v'rachatzu b'mayim b'tamu ha'erev. If you have sexual relations, a couple, both become impure for the day. They go to the mikveh in the morning. They wait till evening to become pure again. So comes the Braita and says, everyone, yes, prat lekala, other than the first night of having relations. Bride. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Chachamim omrim no. We disagree with you. She will become tameh, but prat l'shelo kedarka. Only if you have anal sex, then it doesn't count. So Amalei Hun berei de Rav Nachman le Rav Nachman. Hun is short for Huna. So Huna, the son of Rav Nachman, said to Rav Nachman, Lema kasava Rabbi Yehuda Torah chasal tachshitei kala. In other words, why isn't the kala? Why doesn't she have to go to the mikveh? Is it because she has all this beautiful makeup on from her wedding and the rabbis didn't want her to take it off? They wanted her to remain with her beautiful, look that she had. Is that why? So Amar Lei, he says, no. It's because of what we said. Which is very interesting because then they're connecting impurity with the ability of sexual relations to create a child. So that's where the impurity comes from. And therefore, if it's an act of sexual relations that can't create a pregnancy, then there's no reason to become impure. That's Rabbi Yehuda's understanding, which is interesting conceptually in general. So now they say, So now what's the root of the machloket? How do they read this verse? Rabbanan, Savre, Shichvat Zera, when it says Shichvat Zera, so what do we mean by Zera? Prat lahara'a. Okay, that exempts if the man just goes in part of the way, but not all the way. Ota prat l'shalo kedarka. The word then, Sheshkav ish ota Shichvat Zera. So Shichvat Zera excluded ha'ara'a. Ota excluded shalo kedarka. Rabbi Yehuda savar shalo kedarka v'ha'ara'a mishchichvat zera nafka. No, both of those are cases where he's not going to get her pregnant, and therefore shichvat zera, which is the whole idea, it's going to create a birth. That's already, they're both excluded from that one word, which leaves ota free to exclude something else, and therefore ota prat lekala. That comes to exclude the bride, and that's their disagreement in terms of darshan the pasuk. Another thing that, okay, now we're going to get to a different halacha about, again, though, it relates to when a woman can get pregnant or not. Okay, if you thought that one was a little bit out there and not necessarily scientifically proven, this is a really also out there one. The assumption here is that a woman who is married and then gets divorced or her husband dies and doesn't remarry for 10 years can no longer get pregnant. Okay, that's what Ravin is going to say here in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Ki'ata Ravin amar Rabbi Yochanan, kol shahatat achar ba'alav, she waited after her husband, after her first husband, right, who she's no longer married to, eser shanim v'niseit, and then gets remarried, shuv eina yoledet, okay, will not be able to get pregnant again. So let's say you're a man and you don't have any children and you want to have children. So maybe, it should be an issue if you marry this woman because she's not going to be able to bear children. Amar Rav Nachman, lo shanu ela she'ein da'ata linasei. That's only if those 10 years she was wholly uninterested in remarrying. But if she wanted to remarry, then she could still get pregnant. Okay, this is very hard to understand. Where they got this from is very difficult. And in fact, we're going to bring some stories that somewhat disprove or maybe at least prove this caveat that we just said, that, well, if she wanted to get married all that while, then she still could. So Amalei Rava lebat Rav Chisda. Okay, you have to remember who Bat Rav Chisda is. If you've learned this before, if not, it comes up in Baba Batra. So if you're new to learning, you might not have seen the story yet. The daughter of Rav Chisda was sitting with Rav Chisda on his lap when she was young, and he was with Rami Bar Chama and Rava, and he said, "Which one of these guys would you like to marry?" And she says, "Both," or something like that. And then she basically ends up marrying Rami Bar Chama. He dies. After 10 years pass, she marries Rava, and then she has children with him. So now you can see where the issue is going to go. So Rava says to his wife, the daughter of Rav Chisda, the rabbis are spreading rumors about you, because if she got pregnant after 10 years, maybe she slept with someone in the interim, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense that after 10 years passed, she'd be able to have children. So Amrale Anadatai Allah Havai. Now this has two meanings as far as I can see. She says, my mind was always on you. So what does it mean? It means basically we just said that there was a limitation. Rav Nachman said it's only if she's not planning to remarry. But she said, all the while I was waiting for your wife to die. Basically, I wanted to marry you. My mind was with you. Number two, it means clearly I wasn't sleeping with anyone else because my mind was dedicated to you. My plans were to marry you. Another story. Rav Yosef, a woman comes before Rav Yosef, Amrlo, Rebbe Anashi Achar Bali Eser Shanim V'Yaladiti. And it sounds like she's saying, I can disprove your whole theory, because look, I waited 10 years and I had a child. Amrle, BT, Al Tutzila Al Devrei Chachamim. Listen, your BT, whatever, my daughter, it's just a term. He says, listen, don't start knocking things that the rabbis say, okay? Don't start trying to knock down things that we believe in. So then she says, well, now I'll admit I slept with a Gentile in between. Now, either this means literally, some people explain she really did sleep with a Gentile and that's why she was able to have children. Some people say what it meant is she had eyes for a Gentile. She didn't actually sleep with him, and that this is actually proving Rav Nachman's limitation of this halacha, that as long as she was thinking of someone, then it would be. So we don't know how to read this story. Okay, the last thing we're going to end with, which is really just starting the next sugya, which is Shmuel now says, and there's going to be two different versions. In general, when we have a woman who finishes a marriage, she has to wait 3 months. And now he's going to say there's an exception to the rule. Kulan tzricha la'amar Shmuel, kulan tzricha lamtin 3 chodashim, chutz migiyoret u'mishuchreret ktana. If you have someone who converted when they were a minor, or a maidservant, right, a non-Jewish maidservant who converted as a minor, They're the only ones who don't need to wait 3 months. But a minor who's a Jewish girl, let's say she was married off by her father and then divorced, she'd still have to wait the 3 months. So now, or we'll see what the options are. That's what the Gemara is going to ask. And why she has to wait 3 months? Remember, we said a Ketana can't get pregnant. It's the assumption. So why would she have to wait 3 months? So the Ketana by Israel, in what case? If we're saying she just refuses, remember, her mother or brother marries her off, and then she says, oh, I don't want to be married to him, and she can do that while she's still a Ketana. So Hamar Shmuel de Lobaya. Shmuel said there already in a different place, she doesn't need to wait 3 months. And if it's in a get, he also said if she gets divorced, he actually said she has to wait 3 months. And he said at some other point, so what are you talking about? Because either you already said that's not the case, or you already said it is the case, in which case, why are you saying it again? It means a ktana who had a relationship that was znut, and now she wants to get married. We don't allow her to get married within 3 months, even though there's no chance she's pregnant, but we make a gzeira on a young person, because if we don't make the minors do it, you might think that the older women don't have to do it either, and we don't want you to confuse that, so it's a gzeira. That's the first reading of Shmuel. We're going to have some questions on this, and then we're going to get to the second reading of Shmuel in tomorrow's daf. Have a Shabbat Tov, everyone, and a great day.